His job, he'd get a phone call. Okay, he'd write down the address on the board. He'd wait 5 minutes, then he would drive that truck to that address. The fireman would come by, the sirens would go off and tell them that there was a fire. The fireman would come by, they would look at the board and find out what the address was, and then they would go to that point, go to that place, and they would have the truck sitting there waiting on them. So they were ready to fight fires. Okay, in '55, 15 members of the department were made special deputies. We were having trouble with people following the fire truck and running over the hoses. This also showed up again in about '87. We had a fire. It was early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning when it started, and the hoses were laid out. And a young man came up in his hot rod, his car, and he was going to go into his driveway, which was 2 driveways past the hose. Well, the operator of the truck told him, "Don't drive over my hose." He put the front wheels across the hose. The guy reached in the window, grabbed him by the collar, and said, "You better put it in park." Drug him out the window, went over to an officer and said, "I want to talk to this young man when we get through with this fire." They took him downtown. The car's running. 3 to 4 hours later, we finished the fire. The car's running. They came down here and they talked to the young man for about an hour. The car's running. So about 6 hours later, he got back to his car and it's still running. He put it in park, but he didn't turn the engine off. Okay, first county truck was delivered to the Lake Jackson Fire Department. We talked about it earlier where the county started buying trucks to distribute throughout the county. This had 2 purposes really. Number one, when they gave you the truck, they said it's your truck for 25 years. Use it any way you want to. So we had an extra pumper in the city. Also, they said if a neighboring city needs help, you will supply the truck and the manpower to supply mutual aid to that city. So it put together a mutual aid system throughout the county. Now, right now, if the phone rings or the tone goes off and we're needed somewhere, we go. We have been to Galveston when they were fearing the threat of a rice silo exploding. We have been to Needville to fight a school fire over there. When they formed the emergency district to the west, emergency fire district to the west, the people were sitting around discussing what would happen and how they would finance this and this and this. And they asked about, one of the firemen asked about mutual aid. You know, what's mutual aid? That's when we call another department to come help us. So of course it's okay, yeah, so what's the problem? So we call Lake Jackson sometimes. Lake Jackson is not in the emergency district. They voted out of it. They opted out. Well, how are we going to pay them? And somebody mentioned the fact that a fireman needs help. We're not worried about getting paid. So if we need to go somewhere else into another district, we go, because they'd come to help us if we needed it. January 1957, Paul Israel was elected chief of the Lake Jackson Fire Department 3 years after he joined the fire department. He became chief. New fire station was constructed at number 5 Oak Drive, across the street over here. It is now the court system. That's where our station was before they decided that we needed this building. All right, first aid class was held in the Lake Jackson Fire Department. Mr. Heine Couch conducted the class, and it was Green Cross was the sponsoring agency. Now, obviously Heine is not his name, but that was a nickname he picked up. He was in the EMS working ambulances up in East Texas. Now, this may have been '68, but it was before that, about 10 years before that. He was working ambulances up there, and a man got up in the morning, they still had outhouses, and he went out to the outhouse and he sat down and he got bit by a copperhead. Well, they called the ambulance crew. They showed up out there. Yeah, he got bit by a snake. They still had ice boxes at that time. And Heine raised the lid on that ice box, and there was a block of ice in there. He wraps it up in some triangular bandages, put it on his rear end, tied it off, and they hauled him to the hospital. He gets in the hospital, the doctor comes in, checks him out. Yeah, you've been bit. He grabs a scalpel, and he makes 2 incisions over the wounds. 2 globs of poison fell out. So that's how he got the name Heine Couch. Okay, remember the summer of '72. Dow had a little problem then. There was a strike going on. We also had a little problem with an airliner that landed at our airport. Our airport was not designed for big jets. We got a tone that says, report to the fire station. Okay, we come down to the fire station. I pull in. One of the firemen is leading a man out of the station. He gets out to my truck and says, take him out to the hospital, emergency room. Okay, so he gets in the truck. I didn't know what was going on. We start heading out there, and I noticed the guy is squirming. He said, you okay? He said, yeah, my legs bother me. I said, what happened to your legs? He said, I got shot. You what? Who shot you? He said, the hijackers. What hijackers? The guys that hijacked that plane that landed out here. Okay. And he told me that they had left Florida, they were going to Boston. On the way to Boston, they got hijacked. When they landed in Boston, they pulled up, stopped. The pilot kicked his escape window and got out. The flight engineer and the co-pilot couldn't. They couldn't get out in time. Okay, one of the hijackers shot a hole in the window in the cabin of the aircraft. So they negotiated, and they wound up releasing all the passengers, but they kept the crew, and they got a new plane, the 727. They took off from Boston and they headed west. They got to Tennessee, Memphis. They circled the airport a couple of times. They came on a little bit further. They circled Dallas a couple of times. They came down to Houston. They circled it, and they were heading out over the Gulf. Well, the flight engineer and the co-pilot were telling them, we're running out of fuel. We've got to land. We're running out of fuel. No, this is a stretch jet. No, it's not a stretch jet. Well, okay, here they go. They're over the Gulf. One of the hijackers was back in the cabin with the attendants. They put him in an altitude that was rough, and he was getting airsick. So his buddy up in the cockpit turned around to check on him. Well, he stepped outside the cabin door. They slammed the door on him. Well, the co-pilot, who's now flying the plane, was a fighter pilot in Vietnam. First thing he did when that door slams, he stood it on one wing and dropped it and did a 180-degree turn on the way. He's coming inland. Dropped that wing down, got it level, dropped the other wing. Here he goes again. He made another turn. When they made that second drop, they came through the clouds, and he saw our airport down there. And he said at the time, it looked like LaGuardia. And he put it down. They blew 2 tires on landing, and the nose gear ran off the end of the runway into the soft tarmac at the end. The engines were still running. They kicked the windows. Flight engineer caught the rope, went down, headed for the woods. Co-pilot missed the rope and fell all the way to the ground. The ambulance went out, picked him up, transported him to the hospital. The flight engineer made his way back to the police station, and I took him out there. We spent all day out there while they were negotiating, trying to get these guys off. We had a reporter from Houston come down here, and she decided she was going out with her photographer, and they were going to interview the hijackers. The police had put up a barricade. Do not cross this barricade. She and her photographer crossed the barricade. They made it about 5 foot before they hit the ground, got handcuffed, put in a patrol car, and they spent the entire time over here in jail. That was Jessica Savage. She did not like Lake Jackson Police. She did not like Missouri County cops or anything else. She didn't like anything to do with us down here. But that's what happened in the summer of '72. Okay, April 1st of '73, the city manager, Mr. McLean, came up with plans for a new station. This was going to be our second station because we were growing enough, we had to put in another station, but he didn't give a location. First ECA course. This is a state certified course. They had just passed new ambulance laws at this time. Prior to that time, if you wanted an ambulance, you had to have a cot, you had to have oxygen, you had to have 2 triangular bandages with safety pins. You had to have red lights. It didn't say it had to be covered because you could make a pickup truck an ambulance and it was legal. Now they pass laws where you have to have training. You have to have, your ambulance has to meet certain criteria. We took this class and it was good training. We had a lot of guys involved in it. This was a 40-hour class. A few years later they came out with EMT, emergency medical technician. The first one is an emergency care attendant. Then we have her emergency medical attendant. That was 120 hours of classroom, and you had to spend about 30 of them in the hospital working in different departments to learn the different ways of doing things. New station dedicated, Station 2, at the corner of Oyster Creek Drive and Loop Road. How many of you know where Loop Road is? Yes. Now it is Dixie Drive. Okay, 83, bad day. While responding to a motor vehicle accident over on Old Anglican Road, the ambulance unit 1406 was hit by a falling tree on Oyster Creek Drive. The 2 firemen in there were senior firefighters. They were not seriously injured, although one man did spend 3 days in the hospital. Now, when the tree fell, the ambulance was set up so there was a partition between the driving compartment and the back compartment in the rig. The tree hit on top of that position and rolled to the back. They did not have the attendant in back that day. So it saved his life because when the tree hit, it pushed the cot through the floorboard and blew the left rear tire on that ambulance. It stopped that quick. One guy, the passenger seat, wound up in the floorboard. That was Joe Mitchell. The other guy that was driving wound up against the steering wheel, and he had his pager in his pocket. When he hit the steering wheel, it bruised his chest and his lungs. So that's why he spent 3 days in the hospital, to make sure there was no problems developing from that, like blood clots or anything like that that would give him trouble down the line. Okay, in 1985, Paul came up with a system of fire prevention Lake Jackson style. That was 5 projectors with 5 screens. And he would start through there and he would start hitting the advance button. And he would work it so you go here, 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 and then you start panning them. This got recognized because he used it at A&M. This was recognized as a good thing to do. At the time, there weren't that many portable TD cameras you could take with you, or DVDs you could make, or things like that. So he was noticed at A&M when he was doing that, so he went all over the state. He went to a few other states, and he got invited to Mexico. Down in Mexico, he went down there to put on this for the Mexican fire chiefs. Man, this is going to be great. You got to go down there, you got to put on this thing, spend a couple of days down there relaxing, seeing the sights. Well, he got through with it, got on the plane and headed back. There was a hurricane coming in, so he didn't get a chance to do any sightseeing. Okay, 1988.